The Canandaigua Treaty Committee works for a year to put these events together, and the Friends of Canandaigua over the last 2 years, they have taken over the commemoration, still working with some of the original members of the committee. And each and every year we search for a speaker, someone who will bring some new information or who will share with us some of their thinking, again, related to the treaty, the meaning of the treaty, because after all, that's really what we're here for. And I have to say, I'm very pleased to see so many young faces from the students from various schools that are here today. We hope that all of this will be informative to you. Oftentimes, when we look at the newspaper is fixated on a certain headline, and that headline really dominates all of the information you get about us, meaning Odowi, or Seneca, if you will. That's the only information you get. It's what is in that headline. But behind that headline, of course, there's a larger story. But generally speaking, and I'm just being out front here, the writer does not have the background to be able to write that part of what the background is. Can't tell that part of the story. So we don't get that. We don't read that. And only when we get a chance to talk to individuals can we explain something about what the headline really meant. Our speaker this evening is a graduate of Harvard University, but before that, he's a member of the Heron clan of the Seneca Nation, and he comes from one of our communities we call Ohio, or Allegheny. It is part of the Seneca Nation of Indians. It is located in the southern tier of New York State, and the city that is on our territory is called Salamanca. So if you want to locate it specifically, that's where I'm talking about. In our system of government, the Seneca Nation of Indians, we have an elective system. We elect a president, and it alternates every 2 years. 2 years it's from the Cattaraugus, next 2 years it's from Allegheny. So this year our president is from the Allegheny Territory. His name is Robert Odowi Porter, and he is a lawyer by training, a graduate of Harvard, as I mentioned, and also on leave from Syracuse University. Would you put your hands together and give Mr. Porter a welcome?
Thank you all for having me tonight. It's a little hot in here, and I'm a little worried because in the spirit of our people and our traditions, I was told that I need to keep you entertained and enthused and educated for the next 4 to 5 hours. We don't put ourselves on the clock, and I'm equally shocked that we're starting on time. I don't know that I've been in a meeting that started on time for quite a while. But I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank Peter and the organizers for what has been an increasingly prominent and important event, in the history of the Haudenosaunee, and importantly in the history of the non-Haudenosaunee. That I have not been to this event in many years, and it's very exciting to see so many people who celebrate the meaning of the Canandaigua Treaty and its significance for all of us today. That whether you appreciate it now, whether you appreciate it later, but it's these kinds of agreements, it's these kind of historical moments that you could quite literally look back upon and say, if our people, the American people, had not done this, we may not have survived. And I think for Haudenosaunee people, if we look back upon this and we say, if we did not enter into peace with the Americans at the time, we may not have survived. So I think today, for us to be here on the 217th anniversary is a very exciting thing, and I'm very honored to be here. Now, I will not talk for 4 to 5 hours, just to give you some assurance, but I do want to talk somewhat extensively about what I think that this treaty means to us all in the days in which we are now living, as we set forth and look to the future of the significance of the treaty in our lives as Haudenosaunee, Oneida, Seneca people, and American people. So I want to talk about really a sort of framework of discussion that's rooted in why is this treaty important? And try to set forth a few answers for why it's important for us today. I also want to explain why I believe that our treaty is under attack and why it remains vulnerable to what is going on around us. And I want to give you an explanation in historical context for why that's true. I also want to spend a little bit of time explaining why I think there are things that we can all do together to continue to value and acknowledge the Canandaigua Treaty and how we can make it stronger in the future. Because that's important, I believe, for all of us, and quite frankly, the Haudenosaunee, who historically are now on the short end of a lot of the historical events that have occurred over the last 217 years. So to begin, why is this treaty important? This is a challenge. It is a challenge for any discussion of history. Why is something that happened 217 years ago important today? Well, let's just run through what the Canandaigua Treaty actually did. So the number one thing was that the treaty established peace between the Six Nations and the United States. It's a peace treaty. It's an agreement that we will not wage war against each other and that we will live together in peace. Now, I don't know about you, but there's an awful lot about human history that seems to tell us that we like to war. We like to fight with each other. We like to fight for food. We like to fight for ego. We like to fight for land. That peace moments, maybe more rare than we think. But to have this opportunity to live in peace, that's what this treaty primarily expresses. In so doing, this treaty recognizes the national sovereignty of the Six Nations. It recognizes our nationhood, our distinct political status, separate from the American nation, the United States. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Because of the passage of time and the passage of history, to be recognized as a separate people is significant. Thirdly, it recognizes our land base. The treaty recognized that we have our own lands. Of course, it was once all ours. And those of you who were there earlier this morning to understand the teachings of the Guswenta, the Turo Wampum, we accepted early on that we did not have to maintain control over all of what was once ours. That we could welcome in our brothers and sisters from across the ocean and that we could live together in peace. What that really meant, the subtext, the regulations, the fine print, is that we would be willing to give up some of our lands and waters to our brothers and sisters, up to a point. We maintain our separate societies. And the interesting thing about the promise that was made to us, about recognizing our land base, the title to our lands, is that the United States recognized and promised us something that it promised no other indigenous people, that we would retain the, quote, free use and enjoyment of our lands. Quote, free use and enjoyment. Those are magic words. They're magic words because no other of the several hundred Indian treaties entered into between the United States and Indian nations has the exact same language, and so too because of what that really means. Free use and enjoyment means the United States will not interfere in our business. We decide in our own nations how we govern ourselves. And we live it. It's a philosophy as much as it is a legal term. And the last thing that it really recognizes, it's somewhat a derivative of these other concepts, is it recognizes that we are citizens of our own nations. A nation does not enter into a nation does not enter into treaties with its own people. It only enters into treaties with foreign peoples. And so we are recognized as having citizenship, political status, separate and apart from the United States. Those are the basic key elements of why this treaty is important. And there's more I want to say about this, but I wanted to lay that framework out of peaceful relations, recognition of national sovereignty, recognition of land base and title, recognition of the free use and enjoyment, and then lastly, recognition of our citizenship. Very important elements, all of which continue to exist to the present day. Now, turning to the problem. The problem is that the promise has not always been lived up to on the part of the United States. That we have lived with these constant attacks on our status, on all of these elements that we have been promised 217 years ago. So I want to take a little bit of time to explain to you what this treaty means, because it's taking a departure point almost from the beginning. We think it means one thing, we Haudenosaunee, and the Americans think it means something else. And I want to talk about the acts of Congress, the court cases, the decisions and actions of the political government officials in the American government, because that reflects, among other things, their interpretation of what the treaty means as we move through time. And from the perspective of our nations, I believe that our understanding of this has remained somewhat static, that we have always understood what was promised to us. We have always understood our obligations. And to my knowledge, I could stand corrected, but I don't believe, for example, that in the last 217 years, the Haudenosaunee have declared war on the United States. If anybody can recall that, let me know. But I do believe we've lived up to our promise that we would live in peace with the American people. We've had some skirmishes over the years, but no formal declarations of war. And I think that's important. And as far as I know, even though there have been some disputes over land issues, which I'll get to in a minute, we've otherwise left alone the United States in terms of the operation of its society, which we had promised in 1794.